But they expose an inconsistency on the part of some Christians who want to appeal to some Old Testament rules as binding, say the ones about sexual ethics, for example, whilst completely ignoring all these other regulations. Is eating bacon a sin? Well, as much as bacon may be one of the greatest culinary arguments for the existence of God, critics of Christianity often charge Christians with cherry-picking the Bible when it comes to which rules they want to follow. I mean, doesn't the Old Testament outlaw eating pigs? And that's just the beginning. No shellfish, no clothing made from two different kinds of fabrics, and let's not even get started on what I meant to do with my beard. For many doubters, these Old Testament regulations, they don't just seem strange and archaic, but they expose an inconsistency on the part of some Christians who want to appeal to some Old Testament rules as binding, say the ones about sexual ethics, for example, whilst completely ignoring all these other regulations. So what does the Christian story say about which ethical commandments to follow? Do Christians cherry-pick the Bible's rules? Well, the simple answer is no. But to parse that out, we need to cover some basics about the Bible, because a ton of people, both believers and doubters, are under the false impression that the Bible is just a flat book of rules, basic instructions before leaving Earth. In reality, the various books of the Bible piece together to tell a unified story, the Christian story. You can check out our video, What is Christianity, for the 4-minute summary. But long story short, while Christians believe the whole Bible is inspired by God and therefore profitable, once you actually read the whole Bible, you'll realize why Christians don't follow all the laws in the Old Testament. Because Jesus and his apostles tell us not to. Basically, the Old and New Testaments, they describe different scenes of the Christian story. And at their heart, they represent two different covenants between God and humanity. The Old Testament hones in on the covenant between God and the nation of Israel, mediated through Moses. And the New Testament, it focuses on the new covenant between God and all of humanity, mediated through Jesus. You see, the 613 commandments that make up the Mosaic Law in the Old Testament, the 248 do's and the 365 do-nots, one for every day of the year, these commandments that are designed to spell out how Israel as an ancient nation were to structure themselves socially, politically, and religiously. God had a special purpose for Israel, so that through their story and systems, they might prepare the world for the coming of Jesus, pointing forward to a better reality of which they were merely the promise. For if you keep reading into the New Testament, even though Jesus himself was Jewish and followed the demands of the Mosaic Law, he taught that his own death and resurrection would launch a new and better covenant. Better, because now the door was open for all of humanity to draw near to God, not just Israel. And better because you didn't have to live up to the demands of 613 laws in order to draw near to God. You could come near to him through faith in Jesus. You see, Christians live under this new covenant between God and humanity. So what does that mean when it comes to which rules we should follow? Well, it means that Christians take their cues from Jesus and the apostles rather than from Moses. Because as you keep reading into the book of Acts of the Apostles, this one which chronicles the early growth of the church, there God specifically spells out how you don't have to become Jewish in order to follow Jesus. He even commands his Jewish apostles to abandon their rigid devotion to some of the Mosaic laws by eating things like bacon. So while Christians are saved by trusting in Jesus and don't have to follow the Mosaic laws, Christians are still commanded to follow God's moral law, the one for all people everywhere. And where the confusion comes in, where people charge Christians with cherry-picking which rules to follow, is that there is plenty of overlap between the Mosaic law for Israel and God's moral law for humanity. So how do we tell which Old Testament laws are just to serve Israel's special purpose and which are for all people everywhere? Well, 3 ways. First, you can know if something is a moral law for all people everywhere if it flows out of the model of God's good design in Genesis, before the fall and the Old Covenant come into effect. Second, you can know if something is a moral law for all people everywhere if it's something that God holds pagan people and nations accountable for in the Old Testament. Things like idolatry or sexual immorality and injustice. And third, you can know if something is a moral law for all people everywhere if it's repeated across both testaments, being affirmed as binding upon Christians by the teaching of Jesus and his apostles. So just because bacon is back on the menu while sexual immorality remains off limits, it does not mean that Christians are cherry-picking which rules in the Bible to follow. It means they are carefully reading the whole Bible as the story it was intended to tell, recognizing that Christians live under a new and better covenant as those who believe in and follow Jesus.
Dan here from Questioning Christianity. Thanks so much for checking us out. We are all about helping you connect the Christian story to life's deepest questions. So if you're enjoying the content, make sure you subscribe and click the bell on YouTube, and then go ahead and follow us on socials.